Dark tunnels filled with the remains of millions of bodies.
It's like a place of satanic worship, a site of sacrifice maybe, or somewhere to contact the dead.
A heavily fortified building that's been ripped apart.
We're used to seeing engineering imposed on the land, but here we see a natural revenge of nature against engineering.
An empty town that's been frozen in time.
It almost has a surreal feel to it. It feels like it's sort of a haunted ghost town.
And alien-looking structures on the open ocean.
There's no road access, there's nothing else around, and that might be a clue as to why it was built here in the first place.
Sometimes they are engineering marvels now abandoned, or ruins shrouded in mystery. But within these decaying structures are the echoes of history. While some are associated with dark times, they all remind us of human ingenuity and endeavor. Each haunting shell is now ready to be unmasked, to tell its own unique story. Near the border between California and Nevada, USA, are the ghostly remains of a once dangerous town built on greed.
It's like you've just walked onto the set of Westworld. You're expecting to see outlaws and gunslingers coming around the corner.
There's something spooky about seeing a town that looks like the buildings are intact, but there's nobody around. The wind just blows through.
And you can just see this big layer of dust over the tables and chairs that have been left there for years.
It almost has a surreal feel to it. I mean, there's buildings that are just abandoned, but completely how they were back then. Other things are just rusted and deteriorating.
Some parts are buildings just falling down or shacks that have kind of collapsed. Other sections, like you could move into some of these buildings.
On the edge of town, you've got what looks like the guts of some kind of industry. And I think that is the clue to what happened in this town.
But for everything that is here, it feels like something is missing.
What's interesting about this place is you come to this point which seems like it should be the start of the main street, but there's no buildings on it.
You get the sense that the structures that do remain were part of a much larger community. So that begs the question, what happened to the rest of it? Where did it go?
Despite its eerie emptiness today, in the late 19th century, these streets were awash with the hopes and dreams of prospectors, exploring the open lands of the West.
You're really in the middle of nowhere. Even today, you are miles and miles away from anything.
The motivation for coming to such a remote and desolate location, clearly it was money. It was all about finding something precious and then selling it.
The dusty remains of this town suggest that something was clearly worth sticking around for. But this could be a deadly place to set up shop.
The West was uncharted territory. There was no law enforcement. This was the Wild West. Everyone for themselves.
Preserved for decades by the dry climate, the remaining structures offer only a glimpse of the town's true scale, as Park Ranger Catherine Jones explains.
What we see today is only 5% or so of what was here. So there are many homes left, but there would have been many, many more as far as you can see, especially down to Main Street, which would have been virtually wall-to-wall buildings for over a mile.
What transformed this empty wilderness was gold. This is the ghost town of Bodie. It was once home to around 10,000 inhabitants who filled the streets with feverish activity.
What's really interesting is not what's left, but what's missing. Clearly, a lot is gone, but where did it go? And why?
After Bodie's initial discovery, there wasn't much activity, probably wasn't a whole lot of hope of discovering a lot of gold here. They were mining up on the hillside. You can see the rock piles up on the hill indicate where mines were.
But these early mines offered up little gold. Then, in 1875, a dangerous collapse changed everything.
They went to investigate and found that the collapse had exposed a very rich vein of ore, and that's what started the boom here in this area and formed the town of Bodie.
All of a sudden, Bodie was on the map. Everybody heard about Bodie. Everyone wanted to get there and be part of this exciting operation.
Processing plants like this one began running non-stop.
That building on the edge of town, that is what really gives you a clue as to the scale of the operation that was happening in Bodie.
This is the main processing room of the stamp mill. The gold and silver ore makes its way into these boxes that contain the 1,000-pound stamps. So each of these stamps is lifting and dropping 90 times a minute. It was a very, very loud process, if you can imagine, metal crushing rock 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. Apparently, you could hear Bodie from 3 miles away.
Operating 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, money and profits rained down on Bodie. It was rumored that the boom years earned the mining companies around $100 million, and that every day, 10 new people would arrive here seeking their fortune. This was a part of what was to become known as the California Gold Rush. The third major gold rush in America during the 19th century. At the time, California was not even a territory of the United States. But after gold was discovered here in 1849, workers poured in from Georgia and North Carolina to strike it rich. Soon to follow came dozens of private companies hoping to capitalize on the enormous riches buried in the land. As a direct result of the California Gold Rush, the territory was soon made into a state of the USA.
Bodie had become the sort of Las Vegas of its day. Anything that you could sell, anything that you'd want to buy, you'd find it here. Outlaws, they looked at Bodie and said, here's an opportunity to make a lot of money very fast.
In Bodie, over 2,000 new buildings were built by 1879 to accommodate this huge new influx of people. But the quest for gold had a nasty habit of bringing out the worst in people.
It was so wild that one year the newspapers reported the amazing news that no one had been killed in the entire previous week. Apparently that was a first.
In Bodie, there was a mix of both hard work and maybe not so hard work. Gambling was one of the biggest pastimes. There were over 60 saloons in town, and people liked to celebrate holidays here. They had many dances and masquerade balls.
In the northern end of town was the red light district, filled with brothels and opium dens. This lawless settlement appeared to be on a path to destruction. And in 1892, a devastating fire broke out.
Somehow, fire started, and it spread quickly. These are wooden buildings, and as one began to burn, the one next to it began to burn. And before long, there wasn't much left of that part of Bodie.
But the fire wasn't caused by the kind of debauchery that Bodie was famous for. Times were changing.
With these boom towns, they are literally erected overnight. But as soon as somewhere where gold is easier to find is found, people go. So what you're left with are abandoned wooden buildings in an extremely dry climate. That's a recipe for disaster.
By 1881, thousands of people were leaving. So when the fire happened in 1892, a lot of abandoned buildings burnt down and were never rebuilt.
The fire was the first disaster, but there was more to come that would eventually wipe most of Bodie off the map.
The gradual decline continued until 1932, when yet another huge fire broke out, ripping out the heart of this struggling Wild West settlement.
That fire just traveled down Main Street and wiped out almost everything.
A hardy few continued living in Bodie until the 1940s, and the remaining structures still bear the marks of those final days.
This is only a small portion of what was here. It's just a small glimpse, but it's like their lives were frozen in time.
Bodie is in effect a microcosm of a boomtown, wildly successful, then fades into oblivion. And that happened all across the Wild West.
In the beating heart of Paris lies a dark secret buried deep beneath the streets.
This has got to be one of the spookiest places in the world.
It's a bit of a labyrinth.
It's like you're disappearing into an underworld. There are no other places you've been that are like this.
Decorated tunnels snake endlessly through the damp rock.
It's only when you look in detail at what's making up those ornate designs that you start realizing this is something completely different.
The walls around you begin to change. At first, it's not clear what's happening, but then you begin to see that around you is no longer rock, but human bones.
You have human skulls and big bones stacked up in ways which look nice and artistic, but by their very nature, they're human bones.
It's this confusing mix of death and art. You want to feel horrified by what you see, but somehow at the same time you're drawn into it.
These bones weren't simply thrown in a pile, nor were they simply being stored.
What a horror story to me. That's a crazy kind of place to be.
There has to have been a reason for doing this, a reason that involved the whole city, because there's just no way that you could keep something this big quiet.
Why are there this many bodies buried just meters below one of the world's greatest cities?
The long stacks of human bones lining the tunnels have been here for around 200 years. But for the majority, this wasn't their first resting place. During the 18th century, Paris was the second largest city in Europe. The capital was the center of an explosion in science and philosophy that became known as the Age of Enlightenment. Between 1720 and 1760, books published on science and art doubled, while religious works became rarer. These new ideas were spread from Paris to the rest of Europe, and intellectuals started to pour into the city from around the continent. But this new popularity put a huge strain on the cemeteries.
There were a number of cemeteries around the city, but they were swelling under the weight of the huge number of bodies they contained. And you can imagine the stench of death that was sweeping through the streets being utterly unbearable.
Although it's paved over today, in the 18th century, Les Innocents was the largest cemetery in Paris. It was a dumping ground for dead bodies for more than 800 years. An estimated 2 million people have been buried here.
Even the biggest cemetery eventually gets full, but the Parisians continued to stuff ever more bodies into them.
They'd run out of space in the ground, so they were digging up old bones and packing them into the roofs and walls of the buildings surrounding the cemetery. And it was only a matter of time before this would come back to haunt them.
In the spring of 1780, unusually heavy rains began to put even greater pressure on the cemetery walls that were already buckling under the sheer weight of the bones.
These rains soaked into the ground, expanding everything, with the terrible consequence that the cemetery walls burst, causing a mixture, a slurry of sodden earth and decomposing bodies to slide out into the streets and into the neighboring properties.
Archaeologist Sylvie Robin explains how the French authorities reacted to this grisly event.
A doctor was sent on location to perform a health and safety assessment, and a decision was made to evacuate the entire area for public safety.
News of this gruesome and filthy sight seemed to be the final straw. A solution had to be found, and fast.
This dark subterranean place provided the answer: the Paris Catacombs.
Some of the best-loved attractions, like the Louvre, are built out of Parisian limestone. This came from quarries that originally were on the outskirts of Paris, but as the city expanded, came to be under Paris.
Rumours are that it's around about 170 miles worth of tunnels and man-made excavations of the rocks, which were now beneath the feet of Parisians. They didn't really know they were there.
Mapping of the mine showed a vast network of tunnels and access shafts across the city. Eventually, nearly a mile of these passages were linked together and allocated as the new catacombs space. And in December 1785, the work of moving the bodies there began.
It was a gruesome but a very sophisticated operation. Bodies had been buried in Paris for centuries. All of these had to be dug up, placed into carts at night, and taken to the catacombs, where an estimated 2 or 4 million bodies were placed.
We are stood at the bottom of the original chute used for disposing of the bones. It is through this well, which was initially used to extract the stone, that all the bones were disposed of. You can imagine the 20-meter drop that they experienced. Once they piled up on the ground, they were then distributed throughout the quarry.
The process had to almost be on an industrial scale. Every night, for night after night, moving many, many bones through the system and down into the underground. Really quite a bizarre undertaking.
It took decades to move all of the rotting corpses from Les Innocents and the other cemeteries around Paris. But the bones down here don't look like they were just thrown in or simply stacked to save space. So was there a strange secret behind the design of the site?
We are currently 20 meters beneath the Parisian streets in the district of Denfert-Rochereau on the left bank. We can see here a decoration which is cross-shaped, inserted into the wall of bones. We can also see a repetition of femurs and skulls, some of which are presented facing outwards, and others showing the back of the skull. And just behind there, behind this wall, is a build-up of bones.
The extraordinary attention to detail seemed to go far beyond merely solving a space problem. It appears to have a symbolism and meaning to it.
This decoration was the idea of an inspector for the General Quarry Inspections called Oricard de Thierry. He imagined this whole underground walkway with a slightly morbid display, destined to make us think about death and to welcome visitors.
What he did was to change it from just being a collection of bones into an experience that had soul. He gave these people back a life that modern visitors can reflect on.
In 1860, the last bones were placed inside the catacombs. And ever since, the only bodies to enter have been the very much alive members of the public, hoping to explore the dark depths beneath the city streets. Today, the catacombs still draw visitors into its spooky, quiet interior, sometimes with surprising effects.
The catacombs has succeeded in doing something truly extraordinary, which is that most visitors leave with a sense of sereneness and having been uplifted. There is something deeply soulful and powerful about what they've achieved in the catacombs.
Makes for a strange contrast of experience and emotions. Death, art, worship, history, and remembrance.
On the outskirts of Liège in Belgium, not far from the border it shares with Germany, are the shattered remains of a vast structure.
It's a zone of destruction. Clearly something very violent happened here. There's a sense that once there was an immense tragedy.
And we're used to seeing engineering imposed on the land. But here, it's as though the earth has tried to suck this piece of architecture back inside.
There are sections of triangular installations with circular elements. It's an incomprehensible, ugly, and rather distressing sight. A vast area of mangled concrete and metal.
All around the city are other strange, twisted concrete forms, damaged and abandoned for decades. But this one seems to have suffered worst of all.
The area is so vast, the destruction is so complete, that you're left with the feeling that these ruins have a big story to tell.
What turned something so mighty into something so pathetic?
After seemingly endless European wars during the 19th century, the decision to strengthen Belgium's defences saw the creation of this fort in 1888.
When built in the late 19th century, it was the last word on fortification technology. It was poured concrete, quick-fire artillery, and disappearing mounts. It was the absolute acme of Europe's military technology.
The fort lay untested for 25 years, but storm clouds were gathering over Europe in the build-up to the First World War. In the power vacuum left by the decline of the Ottoman Empire, Germany was eager to assert control over the continent. France already had a deep mistrust of Germany from recent wars in the 19th century. So when Germany agreed an alliance with Austria-Hungary, France became deeply worried. In retaliation, France, Russia, and Britain strengthened their own ties and became an allied force known as the Triple Entente.
Belgium is invented to be a buffer between Germany and France. This means that Belgium has got to be prepared for attack from the east.
Suddenly, Germany found itself encircled by potential enemies. Europe was dangerously divided, and tensions soon reached boiling point.
A small section of the Belgian border where the Germans have the terrain to advance and where the rail lines run through is Liège. If you want to protect your country against a German invasion, this is the obvious point.
The defenses at Liège were vital, and this once state-of-the-art fort would soon face the full might of a modern army. This is Fort Loncin.
When these forts are designed, they are essentially invulnerable. There is no weapon of the 1880s that can breach the walls or destroy the armor of this fort.
Victor van der Perrin is a local expert on the fort.
People were very safe in their minds because there were no other forts in the world made in concrete. No other forts where the artillery was under steel cupolas. In their mind, they could not be taken.
It was designed with a low profile to make it harder to target from distance. And across its surface were an array of retractable and rotating artillery turrets. And if an enemy did somehow manage to get close enough to attack, it would be faced not with high walls to climb, but deadly ditches to traverse. These were, effectively, kill zones.
The ditch that you see here is the outer defense of the fort. If ever an enemy could come into this, breaking through, it will be taken care of by our close-range artillery. You have two guns there in the corner shooting shells that broke open, and 196 lead bullets were flying away and sprayed out.
These guns were placed behind armored walls with clear lines of sight. And at the far end were curved columns designed to send the ricocheting lead bullets around the corners. There was simply no place to hide. The Belgians, meanwhile, would be safely tucked away inside the underground network of rooms and tunnels.
Here we had a rapid-fire gun, 5.7 millimeter, which took care of everybody that come into the ditch. There was no chance to survive.
In 1914, the first shots were fired in the Great War, the war to end all wars. Liège immediately found itself in the firing line. But Fort Loncin alone was never enough to protect the whole city. It was just one part of a much larger fortified position.
If you can stop the Germans getting across the River Meuse at Liège, then you can stop the Germans invading France. Because of the strategic significance of Liège, you couldn't defend it with just one fort. Liège was encircled by a pattern of 12 forts.
Together, the outward-facing ring of forts was a formidable defense. But the invading German army had close to 4 million troops. Belgium had just 200,000.
Germany had no respect for Belgium as a military power. They thought the Belgians had a paper army and cardboard fortresses.
The Germans attack quickly, the Belgians send them away quickly. That shows that for a day or two, the Belgian fortifications around Liège are pretty effective.
But when a heavier attack followed, that defensive ring was pierced, and the Germans marched straight to the heart of the city, bringing with them a weapon for which the Belgians were completely unprepared.
The Big Bertha was the largest gun in the world at the time. It was a howitzer with a shell size of 42 centimeters.
They are able to turn up with effectively a 16-inch naval gun on wheels, and they're able to fire armor-piercing shells right into the walls of the Belgian fortifications.
With a range of 9 miles, Big Bertha was now able to reach the forts at the rear. Fort Loncin, the new command center for the defense, was soon in the crosshairs. Was it Big Bertha alone that caused the complete devastation we see today? Or did something else cause the carnage?
The Belgian forts around Liège were built to defend against the very best artillery of the late 19th century. But time has moved on.
After being shelled for about 2 days by the German artillery, the fort received the 25th shot of the Big Bertha. It touches the powder room that was down below, and everything went up in the air. Flames, blocks of concrete, pieces of bodies. It must have been an inferno.
That final shot had pierced the 2.5-meter thick concrete roof and ignited 12 tons of explosives. It trapped and killed 350 men below and caused an enormous shockwave that tore through the fort.
The vaults went up in the air. The concrete blocks were smashed all over the place, filling the ditch. It was like a hell. It was like a volcano here, and it took only 15 to 20 seconds, and it was over.
The key vulnerability, and it was a fatal one, was that the concrete in the 1880s that they used did not have metal reinforcing rods. The concrete was simply poured in, and this was in no way capable of withstanding 20th century artillery.
So the Belgians were defeated. Despite a courageous fight, they were overwhelmed by an enemy with far superior power and far heavier weaponry. But it was not all in vain.
Fortresses are created to delay an enemy, to slow them down. The Belgians did a pretty heroic job.
The horrible physical failure of the fort was a strategic success for Belgium, France, Britain, and the Allies. Liège was able to slow the German advance into France for long enough for the French and British forces to reorganize and stop the Germans achieving their aims at the beginning of the First World War. Had it not been for fierce Belgian resistance around Liège, the Germans might have won the First World War in a matter of weeks.
The bodies of those who valiantly gave their lives in defiance of the invading German army still lie beneath the ruins.
We try not to forget those boys and doing our best to keep this place what it is, a monument, a graveyard, but also part of memory.
Standing near the coastline of Florida is a strange row of structures that appear to be lost at sea.
From a distance, you see these sculpted organic forms. They're incredible. They're from a different planet.
Such a spooky sight. Was it some kind of military installation, some research center? Maybe it looks like something some crazy monks would have built, you know, in the Greek Isles. There's something timeless about it.
The unique design suggests that this was intended to be something revolutionary.
It feels like an ambitious plan, however you look at it. Whatever someone was trying to achieve here, it was certainly pushing the boundaries.
You got to realize this is really far away from civilization. There's nothing else around here. You're out in the middle of nowhere. Whoever built this had a lot of confidence in their ability to engineer a structure in this wild place.
So what were these strange dome-shaped structures for? And what unforeseen event left them stranded out here?
Well, right now we're heading down towards Cape Romano. It sits in the 10,000 islands. The average depth here is about 3.5 feet, so very tricky to navigate. A lot of boats run aground on a daily basis. Makes it a little more difficult to get down there.
Captain Chris Riley has been navigating these waters for 20 years and knows well the dangers that lie hidden beneath the waves. However, the waters aren't the real concern down here.
One of the things about this area is constantly we're getting hit by hurricanes. It's just constant high wind and rough seas to deal with.
Coastal Florida is not an easy place to build anything. If you're going to build something here, you have to really want it.
There's nothing between you and a potential hurricane or storm racing its way across that water. This is a dangerous place to be.
To choose such an exposed location may look like asking for trouble. But for Bob Lee, a retired oil man with big ideas, this thing needed to be built at all costs.
When Bob Lee discovered this area on the coast of Florida, he fell in love with it, as many people do. But for him, it wasn't enough to just live on some golf course or in some condo. He really imagined getting closer to nature.
Anyone who lives or sails in that area knows what a harsh environment it is. But for Bob to actually build there on the edge of the earth, I think everyone must have thought he was crazy.
But these weren't just any old structures. This was Bob's dream. The Cape Romano Dome Home.
What's fascinating about these structures is you can see that they're futuristic, but they're kind of an old idea of the future. You can see echoes of the 60s and 70s here.
This was all about escaping the modern world with a design that was intended to utilize nature's resources.
He had a gutter system that went around the base of the domes so that when it rained, it would trickle down all sides and get sent to a 23,000-gallon cistern. If you look at the bottom of this dome right here, you'll see the concrete. That's actually where that 23,000-gallon cistern was held. He would filter the water, and that's how he got his drinking and bathing water.
Bob Lee must have just been such a fascinating guy. He was so imaginative. He wanted to build these houses off the grid, and he knew he had to bring in all these supplies by barge, but he also wanted to use local materials, so he worked to develop a kind of concrete that would take advantage of the local sand and seashells.
Today, we talk a lot about carbon footprint and using natural environments, but back in 1981, Bob is really at the forefront of that. He went for it, and these experimental buildings, that's where our inspiration for the future comes.
But there was more to the domed shape than just water collecting and futuristic design. The dome home was built to withstand the brute force of coastal storms.
Being this shape, there was no sharp corners for the wind to catch on, and it would actually roll right around the structure. As well as the shape, he also built it on stilts so that if there was a hurricane and a major storm surge, it would actually flow right under the property and not affect the living space.
Despite all the stormproofing and innovative features, Mother Nature had something unexpected up her sleeve.
Taking on a construction project down here, you'd be foolish not to consider the impacts from storms and hurricanes and waves. But looking at it today, it's clear that something happened that wasn't planned for.
4 of the original 6 domes remain above water. But it wasn't just the strong winds that knocked the other 2 over. Here, change was happening underfoot.
When he completed the property in 1981 and moved in, it was a 3-bedroom, 3-bath house, 2,500 square foot, that sat a quarter-mile inland. So all of this was beach, including a quarter-mile out in front of the property.
Built upon a deserted island, the domes were never meant to be completely surrounded by water. So, what happened to the land?
The water rises in a storm surge, a wind-driven tide of rapid flooding.
In 1992, after 10 years of use, a Category 5 hurricane hit Florida, and a problem that had been slowly brewing beneath the waves began to surface. Hurricane Andrew reached winds of 175 miles per hour, weaving its way through the Bahamas before making landfall in Florida. It killed 65 people and caused damage estimated at more than $27 billion, which at the time made it the costliest ever US hurricane. The high winds created havoc throughout Florida. In one county alone, 117,000 homes were either destroyed or badly damaged. At Cape Romano, Bob Lee's dome home felt the full force of the hurricane.
The buildings were flooded, the beach started to wash away. This beautiful dream of this off-the-grid, sustainable concrete home turned into kind of a bit of a nightmare.
A year later, Bob Lee's family abandoned the domes. But the elements weren't finished with them just yet.
Bob thought about the storms, and he thought about the severe climate in the area, but what he didn't take into account was the shifting nature of the ground beneath.
It was now becoming clear. The real problem was erosion.
The Gulf of Mexico has a natural north to south current. Now you have all this water constantly every single day pushing back and forth. The inevitable storm surges we get from the hurricanes did erode a little bit of the beach and change the coastline here, which caused more current to flow north to south, which has made the sand shift a lot quicker.
The result was an island that was quickly being swallowed up by the ocean. With each passing storm, the problem became worse.
In the Bible, Jesus says the wise man builds his house on stone and the foolish man builds his house on sand. Well, Bob Lee, with all of his great vision and creative ideas, he chose to build his house on sand.
You know, humans have short lifespans compared to geology. So we look at a beach and we say, great, what a nice place to build a home. We don't realize if you could see a time lapse of that same beach over the course of 100, 200, 300 years, you'd realize it's more like a sandbar, something that washes in and out, that changes with time.
But now they appear to be marooned at sea. But who knows? Maybe one day the tides will shift again, and the island will end up back underneath these domes.
Now they lie abandoned. But once, they were at the cutting edge of engineering. There are echoes from history in these decaying structures. Some remind us of dark times, but also of great innovation and human endeavor.